The Captain's Journey, A Tale for Sleep. Introduction. A Journey Across the Sea. Close your eyes and let yourself drift. Tonight, we travel across vast oceans, to distant islands, and through the heart of a young man who learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to continue when all seems lost. This is a tale for sleep, a story of Leo, the sea, and the journey that transformed him. Let the gentle rhythm of the waves carry you into peaceful dreams. Breathe deeply, relax your shoulders, and let us begin. Chapter 1. The Last Light in the Window. On that night when the wind tore clouds above the bay, a young man named Leo understood that childhood had ended. The house stood empty. Mother and father were gone, and the walls whispered only echoes of what had been. Against Leo's chest hung a single memory, his mother's copper button on a cord, brilliant as a distant star. He sat by the window, watching the lights in the harbor below. The masts of ships swayed gently in the darkness, back and forth, as if calling to him through the night. The smell of salt air drifted through the open window, carrying with it the promise of distant shores and adventures yet unknown. If the sea holds a path for those who never surrender, Leo whispered into the darkness, his breath fogging the cold glass, I will find it. The house creaked around him. Every sound seemed to speak of memories, his father's deep laughter by the fireplace on winter evenings, his mother's gentle song while mending sails, her needle catching the lamplight, the scent of bread baking, the warmth of family gathered close. But those voices had faded into silence now, leaving only the wind's call and the distant bell of the harbor buoy ringing slowly in the night. Leo touched the copper button at his chest. It was warm from his body, smooth from his mother's years of wearing it. She had given it to him on her last day, pressing it into his palm and closing his fingers around it. Keep this close, she had whispered. When you feel lost, hold it tight and remember, you carry our love with you always. He had been just a boy then. Now, sitting in the darkness of the empty house, he was something else. Not quite a man, but no longer a child. The space between, where the future opens like the sea at dawn, at his feet lay a small canvas bag, packed with simple things, a change of clothes, a blanket, a knife his father had taught him to sharpen, a tin cup. Not much to carry into a new life, but enough. Sometimes, Leo thought, we must leave everything behind to discover who we truly are. The night deepened. Stars appeared between the racing clouds, winking like distant lighthouses. Leo watched them and thought of his father's stories of navigation, of reading the sky as easily as reading a book. The stars never lie, his father used to say. When you're lost, look up. The heavens will show you home. But where was home now? This empty house with its memories? Or somewhere out there beyond the harbor, where the dark water met the darker sky? Leo stood. His decision was made. Though he had known it for days, perhaps weeks, there was nothing left for him here but ghosts and sorrow. The sea called with a voice older than his grief, promising not comfort but purpose, a reason to wake each morning, a horizon to chase. He found paper and a pencil in his father's old desk, the wood still smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. By candlelight he wrote in careful letters, I will return stronger. He did not know if this was a promise or a prayer, but he meant every word. Leo placed the note on the kitchen table, weighing it down with a smooth stone from the beach, a stone his mother had kept on the windowsill because she loved its colors. Then he shouldered his bag, took one last look at the rooms that had held his entire life until now, and stepped into the night. The wind pushed at his back as he walked down the hill toward the harbor. It felt like a hand, urging him forward. The copper button swung gently against his chest with each step, keeping time like a heartbeat. Behind him, The house grew smaller, its single window still glowing with the candle he had left burning, a last light. A goodbye. Leo did not look back again. His eyes were fixed on the harbor below, where lanterns swung on ship masts, and the future waited in the darkness like an uncharted ocean. The path down to the sea was familiar beneath his feet. He had walked it 1,000 times as a boy, running to watch the ships come in, dreaming of the places they had been. Now each step felt different, heavier, more real. This was not a game of pretend anymore. This was his life, beginning now, in the darkness, with nothing but a copper button and a heart full of questions. At the bottom of the hill, the cobblestones of the port road began. They were slick with sea spray and mist. The sound of water lapping against the dock pilings grew louder. Somewhere, a rope creaked against wood. A gull cried, sharp and lonely in the dark. Leo gripped the button tighter and whispered to the night, to himself, to whatever gods might listen to orphan boys on the edge of everything. I will not give up, I will find my way. And with those words still hanging in the salt air, he walked into the maze of docks and ships, into the smell of tar and fish and possibility, into the beginning of his journey across the endless sea. The last light in the window behind him flickered once, twice, and then went dark. Chapter 2. Flight to the Sea. Dawn broke slowly over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose. Leo reached the docks just as the first fishermen were preparing their boats, moving like shadows in the early light. The smell here was overwhelming, salt and seaweed, wet rope and fish, tar and timber, and the deep, clean scent of open water. Everything spoke of new life. Every sound, every sight, every breath of wind off the bay carried the promise of transformation. Leo stood for a moment, letting it wash over him, feeling something tight in his chest begin to loosen. He walked among the ships, reading their names painted on weathered hulls: the Sea Dancer, the Merchant's Dream, the Catherine May, each one a world unto itself, each one carrying stories of where it had been and where it would go. Leo felt small among these giants of wood and canvas, but not afraid, excited, alive in a way he had not felt since before his parents fell ill. Farther down the dock he spotted a ship that seemed to call to him. She was a schooner, sleek and strong, with 2 tall masts and a bowsprit that pointed toward the horizon like a promise. Her hull was dark wood, well maintained despite obvious years at sea. Her sails were furled, but ready, and on her stern, painted in faded white letters, was her name: the North Wind. Leo approached slowly. On deck, sailors were moving about their morning tasks, coiling rope, checking rigging, calling to one another in the shorthand language of men who have worked together for years. An older man with a weathered face and sharp eyes stood near the gangplank, inspecting a splice in the main sheet. He wore the bearing of authority, though his clothes were simple working canvas. "Excuse me, sir," Leo called up, his voice not quite steady. "Is this ship in need of crew?" The man looked down at him, his gaze traveling from Leo's face to his worn bag and back again. "Might be," he said slowly. "What can you do, boy?" "I can work," Leo said. "I'm strong. I learn fast. I'll do whatever needs doing." "A cabin boy we need," said the man. He descended the gangplank with the ease of long practice, his steps sure on the narrow board. Up close, Leo could see the deep lines around his eyes, the permanent tan of a life lived under open sky. "Name's Fletcher, first mate of the North Wind. You ever been to sea before?" "No, sir," Leo admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. I need—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I need to go somewhere, anywhere, but here." Fletcher studied him for a long moment, and Leo felt as if those weathered eyes could see straight through him. could read every sorrow and every hope written on his soul. Finally, the first mate nodded slowly. "The sea loves the brave," Fletcher said, his voice quiet but firm. "But she tests everyone, no exceptions. If you come aboard the North Wind, you'll work harder than you've ever worked. You'll be cold, wet, tired, and scared. The food is plain, the hours are long, and we show no mercy to laziness. But if you prove yourself—" He paused, glancing up at the ship behind him, affection clear in his face. "You'll learn what it means to be a sailor. You'll learn to read the stars, to feel the weather in your bones, to trust your shipmates with your life. You'll learn what you're made of." "I want to learn," Leo said immediately. "Please, give me a chance." Fletcher looked at him again, then held out a calloused hand. "Trial period. 1 month. You wash decks. You learn knots. You do what you're told when you're told. You pull your weight. You stay on. You don't—" He shrugged. "We put you off at the next port. Fair?" "Fair," Leo agreed, gripping the man's hand. The handshake was firm, sealing something more than employment. A contract of trust. A beginning. "Come aboard then," Fletcher said. "Captain will want to meet you. And get ready, boy. We sail with the morning tide." Leo followed him up the gangplank, his heart hammering. The deck of the North Wind was worn smooth by countless footsteps, scrubbed clean, every line and rope in its proper place. The masts towered above, and looking up, Leo felt a moment of vertigo, imagining climbing up there, high above the safety of the deck. Fletcher introduced him to the captain, a compact man with a gray beard and eyes the color of storm clouds. Captain Morrison asked few questions, nodded at Leo's answers, and finally said, "Fletcher says you're willing. That counts for something. Welcome aboard the North Wind. Don't make me regret it." "I won't, sir," Leo promised. The crew was harder to win over. Sailors are superstitious folk, and a new crew member is always viewed with suspicion until proven. Leo was given a hammock in the forecastle, a bucket and brush, and pointed toward the deck. "Start scrubbing," said a grizzled sailor named Tom, "and don't miss any spots. First mate has eyes like a hawk." Leo scrubbed. His hands grew raw, his back ached. The sun climbed higher, and the work continued. Washing decks, coiling rope, learning the names of things he had never heard of before: halyards, shrouds, stays, cleats, belaying pins. A ship, he quickly learned, was a floating world of specialized knowledge, where every piece had a name and a purpose, and knowing the difference could mean life or death. At midday, the crew broke for a meal of hard bread and salted fish. Leo ate ravenously, not realizing how hungry he had been. The sailors talked among themselves, throwing occasional glances his way, assessing, judging. He kept his head down and his ears open, learning their rhythms, their jokes, their ways. In the afternoon, Fletcher began teaching him knots, the bowline, the clove hitch, the sheet bend. Leo's fingers fumbled at first, the rope seeming to have a mind of its own. But Fletcher was patient, showing him again and again until muscle memory began to form. "A good knot," Fletcher said, "can save your life. A bad knot can kill you and everyone around you. So we practice until we can tie them in our sleep, in the dark, in a storm, until our hands know what to do without our minds having to think." Leo practiced until his fingers ached, until the rope felt like an extension of his hands. Around him, the ship came alive with preparation. Cargo was loaded. Water barrels were filled and lashed in place. Sails were inspected and repaired where needed. The harbor master's boat made its rounds, collecting fees and wishing voyages safe. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and copper, the order came, "Prepare to cast off." Leo's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment of departure, the moment of no return. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, each man to his station. Lines were cast off from dock pilings. The great mainsail was raised, canvas snapping and filling as it caught the wind. The ship groaned and shifted, coming alive, and then, so gently Leo almost missed it, they began to move. The north wind slipped away from the dock, out into the harbor, heading for the open water beyond. Leo stood at the rail, watching his hometown shrink behind them. The houses climbed the hillside, growing smaller. Somewhere up there was the empty house with its cold fireplace and silent rooms. But he was not there anymore. He was here, on the deck of a ship, heading out to sea. The evening wind filled the sails with a sound like thunder. The bow began to rise and fall with the ocean's swell gulls, followed them, crying their farewells. And Leo, gripping the rail with both hands, felt tears on his face, tears of grief and relief and strange, fierce joy, all mixed together. "First time's always hardest," said a voice beside him. It was Tom, the grizzled sailor, his expression softer now. "Leaving everything behind. But you'll see, boy, the sea gets in your blood. Give it time." Leo nodded, not trusting his voice. He touched the copper button at his chest, feeling its warmth, and whispered a silent promise to his parents, to himself, to the future. "I will make you proud." The sun set behind them as the north wind caught the offshore breeze and headed for the open ocean. The sky turned violet and deep blue, and one by one stars appeared overhead, the same stars his father had taught him to name, the same stars that had guided sailors for thousands of years. And there, that first night, Leo climbed into his hammock in the forecastle, listening to the creak of wood and rope, the whisper of water against the hull, the breathing of sleeping sailors around him. The ship rocked gently, rhythmically, like a mother rocking a cradle. For the first time since his parents had died, Leo slept without nightmares. He slept deeply, peacefully, to the ancient lullaby of the sea. Chapter 3. Lessons of wind and salt days flowed into one another, marked by the rising and setting of the sun, by the changing of watches, by the rhythm of work that defined life aboard the north wind. Leo discovered that a ship at sea is never still, never silent. There is always something to do, always some task that requires attention. Sails to trim, rigging to repair, decks to scrub, lines to coil, meals to prepare, water to ration, and through it all, lessons. Fletcher became Leo's teacher, though the first mate would have scoffed at such a formal title. "I'm just showing you how not to die," he would say. But what he taught went far deeper than mere survival. He taught Leo to read the ocean. "Listen to the waves," Fletcher would say, standing at the rail with his eyes half closed. "Hear how they change? That deep sound, that hollow boom, that means shallow water ahead, a reef or a sandbar. But this sound, this softer rush, deep water, safe sailing. The sea tells us everything we need to know if we learn her language." Leo learned to watch the horizon, to read the meaning in the color of the sky, red sky at morning, sailors take warning. Red sky at night, sailors delight. But also subtler signs, the particular quality of light that meant a storm was brewing beyond sight, the way clouds formed in stacks when the wind was about to shift, the behavior of birds, of fish, of the water itself. Captain Morrison would sometimes take the evening watch himself, standing at the wheel with his hands gentle on the spokes, steering by feel as much as by sight. One night, he called Leo over. "You're learning fast," the captain said, his eyes still on the stars ahead. "Fletcher says you're a natural, but there's something else you need to understand, something that can't quite be taught, only learned." "Sir?" Leo asked, Skill is the rope that will pull you out of the darkest water, Morrison said softly. It's what you build through work and practice. But luck? He paused, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. Luck is the favorable wind that fills your sails, and luck favors those who don't give up, who keep trying even when the odds seem impossible. Remember that. The sea respects courage more than cleverness. Leo thought about those words often in the days that followed. He thought about them when his hands were raw from rope work, when his muscles screamed from climbing the rigging, when exhaustion made his bones feel like water. Don't give up. Keep trying. And slowly, he grew stronger. The crew began to accept him. It started small, Tom showing him a better way to tie off a line. The cook, a round man named Barnes, setting aside an extra biscuit for him at dinner. A sailor named Marcus, teaching him a sea chanty to make the work go faster. Then came the day that changed everything. A squall blew up suddenly, the way they sometimes do at sea one moment, clear sailing. The next, wind screaming and rain slashing horizontally across the deck. The mainsail tore with a sound like cannon fire, the canvas ripping along a seam and flapping wildly. "All hands," Fletcher roared. "Secure that sail before it tears clean away." Sailors scrambled up the ratlines, fighting wind and rain and the violent pitching of the ship. Leo, his heart in his throat, started to climb. The ropes were slick under his hands. The mast swayed sickeningly. Below, the deck rose and fell like a toy. But Fletcher's lessons were in his muscles now. Left hand, right foot, right hand, left foot. Don't look down. Don't think. Just climb. He reached the yard where the torn sail was flapping, threatening to beat itself to pieces. 2 sailors were already there, but they couldn't reach the far end where the canvas had jammed in the rigging. Leo, being the smallest and lightest, edged out along the yard, his feet on the foot rope, one arm hooked through the rigging. The wind tried to rip him away. Rain blinded him. But he reached the jammed canvas, worked it free with numb fingers, and helped haul the heavy sodden sail up to the yard where it could be lashed down safely. Only when the last tie was secure did he let himself realize how high he was, how easily he could fall. But he didn't fall. He climbed back down, shaking but triumphant on deck. Fletcher gripped his shoulder hard. "Well done, boy. Well done." That night, after the storm had passed and the stars had emerged again, Tom brought Leo a cup of rum. "You're one of us now," he said simply. "You proved it up there." Leo sipped the rum, feeling it burn down his throat, warming him from the inside. Around him, men were singing a low, slow song about a sailor's life. And for the first time since his parents had died, Leo felt something like belonging. In the weeks that followed, Leo became part of the North Wind's crew in truth. He learned to read the stars for navigation, to gauge the ship's speed by watching the waves, to feel changes in the wind before they happened. His hands developed thick calluses. His arms and shoulders grew strong from hauling rope. His skin tanned dark under the tropical sun. And every evening, before sleep, he would hold his mother's copper button and think about how far he had come and how far he still had to go. The sea, he discovered, was both teacher and test. She was beautiful beyond words, sunsets that painted the sky in impossible colors, nights when the stars reflected in the calm water making it seem like the ship sailed through space itself. Mornings when dolphins raced alongside the bow, but she was also dangerous, unforgiving of mistakes, powerful beyond human understanding. One calm evening, Barnes the cook told Leo a story while they were preparing the evening meal. "Every person on a ship matters," Barnes said, his knife moving with practiced efficiency as he chopped dried vegetables. "Captain, cabin boy, everyone in between. We're like the rigging, see? Each line has a job. Each line holds something in place. Cut one, and maybe nothing happens. But cut enough, and the whole thing comes down. You remember that, Leo. We're strongest when we work together. Leo took those words to heart. He helped where he could, learning not just his own duties but understanding how his work connected to everyone else's. He learned that the morning watch was the loneliest but also the most peaceful. That the dog watch in the evening was when men told their best stories. That the middle watch, deep in the night, was when you learned who you really were, alone with the stars and the sea and your own thoughts. His body hardened, his skills sharpened, and the sea slowly began to feel less like an enemy to be feared and more like a challenging friend to be respected. One night, under a sky full of stars, Fletcher found Leo at the rail. "You're thinking," Fletcher observed. "Yes, sir," Leo admitted. "Thinking about how different I am from the boy who came aboard. It's only been a few months, but I feel changed." "The sea does that," Fletcher said quietly. "She takes what's soft in us and makes it hard, takes what's hard in us and makes it flexible. It's the best teacher in the world if you survive the lessons." He paused. "Your parents would be proud, I think." Leo touched the copper button at his chest. "I hope so," he whispered. And the north wind sailed on through calm seas and rough, through starlit nights and stormy days, carrying Leo farther from the boy he had been and closer to the man he would become. Chapter 4. Pirates in the Fog. The morning began like any other. Leo was on deck, helping to coil the lines after the night watch had adjusted the sails. The air was cool and damp, carrying the weight of moisture that promised fog later in the day. The sun was just a pale disk behind the clouds, and the sea was the color of old pewter. By mid-morning, the fog had rolled in. It came slowly at first, wisps of white drifting across the water like ghosts, then thicker until the bow of the ship disappeared into cotton-white nothing, then thicker still until Leo could barely see from one end of the deck to the other. The world shrank to a bubble of gray light, with nothing beyond but the muffled sound of water against the hull. Captain Morrison ordered the ship's bell rung every few minutes, a warning to any other vessels that might be near. The slow, deep tone echoed strangely in the fog, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once Leo found it eerie, unsettling. The crew grew quiet, speaking in low voices when they spoke at all. Fletcher appeared beside Leo, his face serious. "Stay alert," he said quietly. "Fog like this, it hides things, not just rocks and reefs, sometimes other ships, and not all ships are friendly." Leo nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the copper button at his chest. Around him, he noticed the crew was tense, watching, listening. Even Tom, usually jovial and full of stories, was silent, his eyes scanning the impenetrable white wall that surrounded them. Then they heard it, the creak of wood, the faint splash of oars, sounds that didn't come from their own ship. "All hands," Captain Morrison said quietly, his voice barely carrying. "Ready yourselves." The fog swirled, and suddenly there it was, a dark shape materializing from the whiteness like something from a nightmare. A ship, larger than the north wind, with black sails that hung limp in the still air. On those sails, faded but still visible, was a symbol that made Leo's blood run cold, a crimson skull over crossed bones. Pirates. The ship approached silently, propelled by muffled oars. Men lined its rails, armed with cutlasses and pistols. At the bow stood a figure in a long coat, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "North wind," a voice called out, rough as gravel. "Heave to and prepare to be boarded. Resist and you'll feed the fish. Comply and you'll keep your lives. Choose quickly." Captain Morrison's jaw clenched. Leo could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing odds, considering options, thinking of his crew. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. "Lower the sails," he ordered. "Don't resist. No man's life is worth cargo." The pirate ship came alongside, grappling hooks flying across the gap, ropes pulling the two vessels together. Pirates swarmed aboard the North Wind, moving with the efficiency of long practice. They rounded up the crew, separating them from any weapons, searching the ship with methodical thoroughness. Leo stood with the others, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The pirates were a rough lot, scarred, tattooed, with the hard eyes of men who lived outside the law. They took what they wanted: food, water, rum, anything of value. The captain watched, stone-faced, as his ship was pillaged. Then one of the pirates, a tall man with a scar running from eye to chin, stopped in front of Leo. He looked him up and down, noting his youth, his strong build from months of hard work. "This one," the scarred pirate said, grabbing Leo's arm. "Young, strong. He'll fetch a price, or we can use him ourselves. Bring him." "No." Fletcher started forward, but a pistol barrel in his rib stopped him. "Stay where you are, old man," another pirate warned. Leo felt rough hands grip him, pulling him toward the rail. He looked back at Fletcher, at Captain Morrison, at the crew that had become his family. Their faces were angry, helpless, sympathetic. Tom mouthed something that might have been "courage" or "don't give up." Leo clutched the copper button at his chest one last time, before he was shoved across the gap between ships, landing hard on the deck of the pirate vessel. The world seemed to spin. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not after he had found his place, his purpose. But it was happening. The grappling hooks were released, the ropes were cut. The two ships drifted apart, the fog swallowing the north wind until it was nothing but a shadow, then nothing at all. Leo was hauled roughly across the deck and down a ladder into the dark belly of the pirate ship. The smell hit him first: unwashed bodies, rot, bilge water, and something else he couldn't name. Fear, perhaps. Despair. They threw him into what could only be called a prison hold. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed him whole. For a long moment Leo simply stood there, his breath coming in gasps, panic clawing at his throat. Then, slowly, his eyes adjusted to the minimal light filtering through cracks in the deck above. He could make out his surroundings: a small space, barely tall enough to stand in, with water sloshing in the bilge beneath the floorboards. And he was not alone. "Easy, lad," a voice said from the darkness. "Take slow breaths. Panic won't help you here." Leo spun toward the voice. Gradually, he could make out two figures sitting against the far wall. One was a man of maybe 50, with the weathered hands of someone who had spent his life working outdoors. The other was a woman, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who refused to be broken despite circumstances. "I'm March," the man said, "fisherman by trade, was hauling nets when these devils took me 3 weeks back. And this is Aisha. She's a healer, taken from a merchant vessel." "Leo," he managed to say, I was a sailor on the North Wind." "Welcome to the belly of the Crimson Squall," Aisha said, her voice steady despite everything. There was something calming about her presence, something that reminded Leo of his mother. "Not the best accommodations, but we make do. Come, sit, save your strength. You'll need it." Leo sat, his legs suddenly weak. The reality of his situation was sinking in. He was a prisoner on a pirate ship, with no idea where they were going or what fate awaited him. As if reading his thoughts, March spoke. "The fear is worst at first," he said gently, "but it gets better. Or rather, you get stronger. We have each other down here that counts for something. When you're afraid, Aisha added, pulling something from her pocket, a small cloth bundle. Think of what loves you, what you love. Hold it close in your mind. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a pressed flower, faded, but still intact. My daughter gave this to me the day before I shipped out. I look at it every day. It reminds me why I need to survive, to get back to her. Leo touched the copper button at his chest, his mother's button, his talisman, his reminder of home and love and everything he was fighting for. My mother's, he said quietly. It's all I have left of her. Then guard it well, March said, and guard your hope even more carefully. Down here, hope is the most valuable thing we have. Over the hours that followed, Leo learned more about his fellow prisoners. March had been a fisherman in a small coastal village, taken when pirates raided his boat for supplies. He was patient, kind, with the sort of calm that comes from a life spent reading the moods of the sea. He taught Leo a knot, a special one, he said, that never failed, even under the greatest strain. Everything in life is like this knot, March explained as Leo's fingers learned the pattern. When you think it's about to break, that's when it holds strongest. Aisha had been a healer on a merchant ship, valued for her knowledge of medicines and her skill at treating injuries. The pirates had kept her alive because occasionally they needed her skills, but otherwise left her in the hold with the other prisoners. She had a way of finding calm in chaos, of making even this dark, damp prison feel a little less hopeless. She shared what little food she had saved, spoke words of encouragement, and tended to Leo's scraped hands and bruised ribs with gentle efficiency. "You're strong," she told him as she worked. "I can see it, not just in your body, but in your spirit. Whatever happens, don't let them break that." The days began to blur together. Leo counted them by listening to the sounds above, the change of watch, the ringing of bells, the rhythm of day and night. The pirates rarely came below except to throw down scraps of food or drag someone up for labor. Leo, March, and Aisha shared everything: meager rations, stories, hope. March told tales of his village, of his children and grandchildren, of fishing in the dawn light. Aisha spoke of the places she had traveled, the people she had healed, the herbs that grew in faraway lands. And Leo, in turn, told them about the North Wind, about Fletcher and Captain Morrison, about learning to sail and finding his place in the world. "You'll find your place again," Aisha said with certainty. "This is not your ending, Leo. It's just a chapter. A dark one, yes, but chapters end and new ones begin." Leo wanted to believe her. In the darkness of the hold, with the ship creaking around him and the future uncertain, he held tight to those words. He held tight to the copper button. He held tight to the memory of everything he had learned, everyone who had believed in him. "Don't give up," he whispered to himself each night before uneasy sleep claimed him. "Never give up." Above, the pirates laughed and drank. The ship sailed on to destinations unknown. And below, in the darkness, 3 prisoners waited, hoped, and refused to let despair win, because sometimes survival is an act of defiance. Sometimes hope is the greatest rebellion, and sometimes the strongest chains are the ones we refuse to let bind our spirits. Chapter 5. In the Hold of the Crimson Squall. Time moved differently in the darkness. Without sun or stars to mark the passage of days, Leo learned to measure time by other things: the rhythm of waves against the hull, steady in calm seas, irregular when the weather turned rough, the sounds of footsteps above, the heavy tread of the watch changing, the quick scurry when orders were given, the delivery of food such as it was, stale bread and water, sometimes dried fish or a thin gruel, lowered down in a bucket twice a day. Leo counted each delivery as a day. By his count, he had been a prisoner for 17 days when the real darkness set in. Not the physical darkness of the hold. He had grown accustomed to that. But the darkness of doubt, the voice in his head that whispered, "What if you never escape? What if this is all there is now?" He was sitting against the damp wall, knees drawn up, when Aisha moved to sit beside him. Even in the dimness, she seemed to sense his despair. "Tell me about the sea," she said quietly. "Tell me what you learned on the north wind." Leo was silent for a moment, then began to speak. He told her about watching sunrises from the deck, how the light would break across the horizon like the world being born new each day. He told her about dolphins racing alongside the bow, their joy so obvious it made everyone smile. He told her about learning to read the stars, how Fletcher had shown him the constellations and their names, how navigators had used them for thousands of years to find their way home. As he spoke, the darkness seemed to lift a little. The hold was still damp and cold, the future still uncertain, but the memories were bright and real, and his. "You see," Aisha said when he had finished, "they can chain your body, but your memories, your knowledge, your spirit, those are yours forever. No pirate can take them." March joined them, settling down with a soft grunt. "She's right, lad. I've been thinking. We're not helpless. We're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Leo asked. "Opportunity," March said simply. "Every prison has a weak point. Every ship has moments of chaos. We stay strong, we stay alert, and when the chance comes, if it comes, we're ready." "The storm will come," Aisha added. "It always does at sea, and in storms, even the most careful sailors can become distracted." Her words proved prophetic. It happened 4 days later, by Leo's count, 21 days in the hold. The ship had been pitching more heavily for hours, and the sounds from above had grown more urgent. Leo could hear shouted orders, running feet, the groan of timbers under stress. Then the real storm hit. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Leo was thrown across the hold, slamming into the far wall. Water began to pour through the cracks in the deck above, not a trickle, but a deluge. The ship pitched violently, again and again, and with each lurch, more water cascaded down. "Hold on to something!" March yelled over the roar of wind and water. Leo grabbed for a support beam, his fingers finding purchase just as another massive wave hit. The sound was incredible. Thunder and screaming wind and the tortured groaning of the ship being battered by forces beyond human control. Above, he could hear shouting, curses, the sound of something heavy crashing across the deck. "The pirates are fighting for their lives up there," Aisha called out, her voice barely audible. "They've forgotten about us." "Now!" March shouted. "Now or never!" He lunged for the hold's door, throwing his weight against it. Once, twice. On the third try, as the ship pitched hard to port, the door, never meant to withstand force from this angle, gave way. They tumbled out into the lower deck, which was chaos. Water sloshed around their ankles. The lanterns had gone out, leaving only flashes of lightning through cracks to illuminate their surroundings. The ship was pitching like a wild horse, trying to throw them off. "There," Aisha pointed. Through the confusion, Leo could see it. A barrel floating free, rope still attached to its bands. It was one of the water barrels, broken loose from its lashings. The three of them fought their way to it, grabbing hold. March was already working the rope free, his fisherman's fingers swift and sure even in the chaos. "If we can get up to the deck," he gasped. "If we can get this barrel over the side in the confusion." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. It was a desperate plan, a chance in 1,000. But it was a chance. They dragged the barrel toward the ladder leading to the main deck. Each step was a battle against the pitching ship, and the water that now rushed around their knees. Lightning flashed, and in its brief illumination, Leo saw March's face, determined, focused, alive with purpose. They reached the ladder. Above, the hatch was open, left that way in the chaos, or perhaps blown open by the wind. Rain and spray poured down, but beyond it was the deck, and beyond that, freedom or death. Together, Aisha said. We go together or not at all. They climbed, hauling the barrel with them through sheer desperation and strength born of hope. The deck was a nightmare of activity. Pirates fighting to save the ship, wrestling with sails that wanted to tear free, trying to keep the vessel from capsizing. No one noticed 3 prisoners emerging from below. No one noticed them dragging a barrel toward the rail. A massive wave rose up, a wall of water higher than the mast. Leo saw it coming and screamed a warning, but his voice was lost in the storm. The wave hit like a giant's fist, sweeping across the deck, tearing loose everything that wasn't tied down, including Leo, March, and Aisha, clutching their barrel. The water grabbed them, lifted them, and hurled them into the churning sea. Leo had one moment to suck in a breath before the ocean closed over his head. Salt water burned his nose and throat. The rope bit into his hands. Everything was tumbling, spinning, no up or down, just chaos and pressure and cold. Then his head broke the surface. He gasped, coughed, gasped again. The barrel was there, still floating. March was there, his arm hooked through the rope. And Aisha, where was Aisha? Here! Her voice came from the other side of the barrel. I'm here! Another wave hit them, but they held on. The storm raged around them, but they held on. The crimson squall was somewhere in the darkness, already distant, perhaps already sinking for all they knew. But they held on. Lightning flashed, and in that brief moment of illumination, Leo saw March's face and Aisha's face, both fierce with determination, survivors, friends, family. They held on through the endless night, through waves that tried to drown them, through wind that tried to rip them apart, through cold that tried to steal their will to live. They held on because giving up meant dying, and they had not come this far to die. Gradually, slowly, the storm began to ease. The waves grew smaller. The wind dropped from a scream to a roar to a howl. The sky, still dark, began to show the faintest hint of dawn, and there, impossibly, unbelievably, a line on the horizon. Not sea, but something else. Something solid. Land, March croaked, his voice raw. That's land. They kicked, weakly at first, then stronger, propelling the barrel toward that distant line. The current seemed to be with them, pushing them in the right direction. Perhaps luck, perhaps fate, perhaps simply the ocean's whim. The sun rose pale and tentative, revealing what they had seen. A beach, white sand, green jungle beyond an island, small but real. The waves pushed them the last distance. Leo felt sand beneath his feet and nearly wept with relief. They dragged the barrel up onto the beach, then collapsed, too exhausted to do anything but breathe. They lay there as the sun climbed higher, warming them, drying their clothes, returning life to cold, numbed bodies. Around them the island was waking, birds calling, insects humming, the rustle of wind through palm fronds. Finally, March sat up. He looked at Leo, then at Aisha, and he started to laugh. A deep, relieved, incredulous laugh. We made it, he said. Against all odds, we actually made it. Aisha was smiling, tears running down her cheeks. We're alive. Leo touched the copper button at his chest. Incredibly, impossibly, it was still there. He looked at these two people who had been strangers and were now bound to him by shared ordeal and survival. He looked at the island, unknown and potentially dangerous, but solid ground after weeks on ship and hours in the sea. "We're alive," he repeated, and then, because it needed to be said, because it was a promise to himself and to them, and we're going to stay that way, whatever it takes. The island waited, silent and mysterious. The sun climbed higher, and 3 survivors, battered but unbroken, began to plan their next chapter. Chapter 6. The Island Without a Name. The beach was perhaps 100 yards of white sand, curved in a gentle crescent between rocky outcroppings on either end. Beyond the beach, dense jungle growth formed a wall of green. Palm trees, vines, flowering plants Leo couldn't name. The air was thick with humidity and alive with sounds. The calls of birds, the buzz of insects, the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. After they had rested and caught their breath, March was the first to stand. Despite his age and the ordeal they had endured, the old fisherman moved with purpose. "First things first," he said. "We need fresh water, shelter, and a signal fire in that order." Aisha nodded, getting to her feet more slowly. Leo could see that her shoulder was injured. She held it carefully, her face tight with pain. But when he moved to help her, she waved him off. "I'll manage," she said. "We all have our hurts. Let's focus on survival first, tending wounds second." They explored the immediate beach area, finding debris that had washed up, pieces of wood, lengths of rope, even a torn piece of canvas that might have come from their own desperate voyage, or from some other shipwreck years or decades ago. March began collecting the larger pieces, sorting them by potential use. "We can build a shelter from this," he explained to Leo. "Nothing fancy, but enough to keep rain off and sun out during the hot part of the day." Together they constructed a crude lean-to against one of the large rocks at the edge of the beach. They used driftwood for the frame, lashing pieces together with the rope they had found. The canvas served as a roof, and large palm fronds layered over it provided extra protection. It wasn't beautiful, but it was functional. While they worked, Aisha walked the beach slowly, examining the rocks and tide line with a healer's eye. She returned with several large shells and smooth stones. "These will work for containers," she said, showing them shells deep enough to hold water. "And see here, these rocks are porous. If we can find fresh water, we can use these to filter it." The search for water led them inland, into the edge of the jungle. The transition from beach to forest was abrupt, one moment walking on sand, the next pushing through dense growth. The air grew cooler under the canopy, smelling of earth and green things growing. They found a stream within 15 minutes of searching, clear water running over smooth stones, heading toward the sea. March tasted it cautiously, then nodded. "Fresh, sweet. We're fortunate this island has its own water source. We won't die of thirst." They used Aisha's shells to carry water back to their camp. Making multiple trips, the water tasted better than anything Leo had ever drunk, washing away the salt from the ocean, soothing his parched throat. With water secured, they turned to the matter of signaling. Using wood from the jungle and dried seaweed from the beach, they built a fire pit in an open area where smoke would be visible from the sea. March produced a small piece of flint from his pocket, something he had somehow kept through their whole ordeal. And with patient work, he managed to coax a spark into flame. The fire caught, grew, sent smoke rising into the clear afternoon sky. March showed Leo how to feed it with green leaves and damp wood to make the smoke thicker, more visible. They took turns watching it, keeping it alive but not too large, ready to build it up if any ship should appear on the horizon. As the sun began to set on their first day, they gathered near the fire. Using pieces of driftwood, they spelled out a message in the sand above the high tide line. "Alive." "So any ship passing will know," Aisha explained. We're not just debris. We're people. And we're here. That night, they shared a simple meal of fish March had caught in the stream using a spear he had fashioned from a straight branch. It wasn't much, but it was fresh food, and after weeks of stale bread and thin gruel on the pirate ship, it tasted like a feast. As darkness fell and stars emerged, brilliant and uncountable in the clear sky, they sat around their fire and talked quietly about the island, about their situation, about hope. "We don't know where we are," March said, poking at the fire with a stick. "Could be on a major shipping route, could be in the middle of nowhere. We need to prepare for a long stay." "Then we explore," Aisha said. "Learn the island. Find out what resources we have. Make this place not just a prison, but a home, at least for now." Leo looked out at the dark ocean, then back at the fire, at these two people who had become his companions in survival. "As long as we're together," he said, "the island won't swallow us. We'll survive this." Aisha smiled. "Yes, we will." Over the following days, they established routines. Each morning, Leo would rebuild the signal fire, sending smoke into the sky. March would check his fish traps in the stream and hunt for other food sources. Aisha would gather plants, testing them for edibility or medicinal value, drawing on her knowledge as a healer. Together, they explored the island. It was larger than they had first thought, perhaps 3 miles long and 2 miles wide, shaped roughly like a teardrop. The interior was hilly, with dense jungle vegetation. On the far side, opposite from their beach, were tall cliffs that dropped straight down to crashing waves. They found a freshwater lake in the center of the island, surrounded by palms and flowering trees. Fish swam in its clear water. Birds nested in the trees around it. It was a beautiful place, peaceful, and they agreed it would serve as their backup camp if anything happened to the beach settlement. Around the island grew coconut palms, which provided both food and water. March showed Leo how to climb them, wrapping a rope around the trunk for leverage, shimmying up to knock down the coconuts. The milk inside was sweet and refreshing. The meat was filling. The shells could be used as cups and bowls, but the island was not paradise. They discovered this on their 5th day when Leo found the footprint. It was on the path between their camp and the lake, huge, round, pressed deep into the soft earth, too large to be human, too shaped to be an animal, something else. They followed the trail of footprints cautiously, and at dusk, from a safe distance, they saw it. A giant of a creature, at least 10 feet tall, with one eye in the middle of its forehead, covered in what looked like encrusted salt and dried seaweed, as if it had emerged from the sea itself. The cyclops was rummaging around some coastal caves, using its massive hands to pry open rocks, searching for mollusks and crabs. Its movements were awkward but powerful, and when it roared, a deep, echoing sound that seemed to shake the ground, all 3 of them felt their blood run cold. "We keep away," Aisha whispered. "Far away. It hasn't discovered our camp yet. We need to keep it that way." They moved their main camp deeper into the jungle, finding a spot near a small cave in a rocky outcropping. The entrance was narrow, too narrow for the giant, but large enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, the cave was dry and surprisingly comfortable. It became their new home, their safe place. March and Leo worked together to create an early warning system, a circle of dried branches and shells that would crunch and rattle if anything large approached. Aisha found herbs that, when burned, produced a smoke that seemed to repel the insects that plagued them at night, and Leo learned to read the island's silences. When the bird suddenly stopped singing, it meant the giant was near. When the monkeys in the trees went quiet and still, Danger was close. He learned to move like a shadow, to breathe slowly, to wait with patience he hadn't known he possessed. They saw the giant several more times over the weeks that followed, always at a distance, always with hearts pounding, but it never discovered their hidden camp. And slowly, fear became simply another part of life on the island, present but not paralyzing. "We adapt," March said one evening as they sat in their cave, safe and hidden. "That's what humans do best. We adapt to anything, survive anything, if we're determined enough." Leo looked at the copper button he still wore. How many times had he touched it for comfort? How many times had it reminded him of home, of his mother, of the person he wanted to become? "We'll get off this island," he said with certainty. "Somehow, someday, we'll find our way home." Aisha laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I believe you," she said, "but until that day comes, we make the best of where we are. We survive, we live, and we remember that even in exile, we're not alone." The fire crackled. Outside, the jungle sang its evening song, and 3 castaways, battered by fate but not broken, settled in for another night on an island without a name. Chapter 7. Fire, Water, and First Hearth. The greatest challenge, they quickly discovered, was not finding food or water or shelter. It was creating fire when they needed it. The single piece of flint March had carried was precious, but getting a spark to catch in the humid jungle air required patience, skill, and materials that were often damp. Leo took on the task of fire-making as his responsibility. Each morning he would gather the driest materials he could find, inner bark from certain trees that stayed relatively dry, dried grasses from sunny clearings, small twigs that would catch quickly. He learned which trees had resin that would burn even when damp, which leaves could be dried in the sun to make excellent tinder. But knowing what to gather and actually making fire were 2 different things. His first attempts were frustrating. He would arrange the tinder carefully, strike the flint against a suitable stone, send sparks flying, and nothing. The spark would die before reaching the tinder, or it would reach the tinder but fail to catch, or it would catch briefly, glow for a moment, then fade to nothing. His hands grew sore, his patience wore thin. He could feel March and Aisha watching him, and the weight of their need pressed down. Without fire, they couldn't cook fish or purify water from questionable sources. Without fire, they had no way to signal passing ships. Without fire, the jungle nights were dark and full of sounds that spoke of dangers unseen. "The dry stem from the middle of the bush," March said on the 3rd day, when Leo was near despair. "See that plant there? The one with the thick stalk? Split it open. The inside stays drier than the outside." Leo did as instructed, splitting the stalk with his knife. Inside, the pith was indeed drier, almost powdery. He shredded it with his fingers, creating a small nest of the finest material. Then he tried again. Spark, 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 and then a tiny glow, a small ember nestling in the tinder. Leo bent close, blowing gently, so gently, feeding it oxygen without blowing it out. The glow brightened. A thin wisp of smoke rose. He added the finest shreds of bark, then slightly larger pieces. The smoke thickened, and then, suddenly beautifully, a small flame flickered to life. Leo laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. He carefully fed the infant fire, nurturing it, watching it grow from a candle-sized flame to a real fire that could cook, warm, protect. When he looked up, he found both March and Aisha smiling at him. "Well done, lad," March said. "Well done indeed." Aisha had been busy while Leo worked on fire. She had found several plants she recognized from her healing work, herbs that could reduce fever, leaves that when boiled made a tea to settle the stomach, roots that could be mashed into a poultice for wounds. She had also discovered that the inner bark of a certain tree, when stripped and pounded, became surprisingly soft and could be used as bandaging. She tended to her own injured shoulder, which had been dislocated during their escape from the pirate ship. With March's help and a great deal of pain, she worked it back into place, then bound it with strips of bark cloth to keep it immobile while it healed. March, drawing on his lifetime of fishing knowledge, had constructed several ingenious traps. He wove baskets from flexible vines, creating cone-shaped fish traps that allowed fish to swim in but not out. He set these in the stream and checked them twice a day, usually finding at least a few fish caught in the clever design. He also showed Leo how to make a fishing spear from bamboo, a straight shaft with the end split and sharpened into multiple points, bound with vine to keep it from splitting further. With practice, Leo learned to stand very still in the shallow parts of the stream, spear poised, waiting for fish to swim close enough. The first time he actually caught one, he felt like a hunter from ancient times, self-sufficient and capable. By the end of their first week on the island, they had established a rhythm: fire in the morning, fish from the traps, coconuts gathered and opened, water collected in their shell vessels, exploration of new areas during the middle of the day, preparation of the evening meal, stories around the fire as night fell, sleep in the relative safety of their cave. And slowly the terror of their ordeal on the pirate ship began to fade, replaced by a different kind of existence, not comfortable, not easy, but theirs. They were building something here, not just surviving, but living. One evening, after they had eaten a meal of grilled fish and roasted coconut, seasoned with herbs Aisha had found, they sat together watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. "You know," Aisha said thoughtfully, "there's something beautiful about this, about being forced to rely only on ourselves, on what we can make with our hands and our minds. It's hard, yes, but it's also pure somehow." March nodded. "In the village where I grew up, the old ones used to say that comfort makes us soft, but challenge makes us strong. I never quite understood it until now." Leo looked at his hands in the firelight. They were scratched and calloused, scarred in places from sharp shells and thorns. But they were capable hands now, hands that could make fire, catch fish, build shelter, tie knots that held, hands that had learned to work with the world rather than against it. "My father used to say that every person is like a blade," Leo said quietly. "The harder life pounds on you, the stronger you become if you don't break." I think I'm beginning to understand what he meant. The smoke from their fire rose into the darkening sky, carrying with it a message. We live, we endure, we are here. And on an island without a name, in a sea without boundaries, 3 people who had been strangers had become something more, not just survivors, but a family forged in the crucible of necessity and held together by mutual respect and shared struggle. That night, Leo fell asleep to the sound of waves on the distant beach and woke to bird song that seemed like a greeting. Another day, another chance, another opportunity to be grateful for being alive. Chapter 8. Wings over the cliffs. The morning began with screams from the sky. Leo jerked awake, his heart pounding, instinctively reaching for the knife he now kept always at his side. Above the cave, something was circling, something large enough to cast shadows that flickered across the cave entrance like dark flames. He emerged cautiously, squinting up into the bright morning sun. And there it was, an eagle, but like no eagle he had ever seen. Its wingspan was enormous, easily the width of a ship's sail. Its feathers were deep brown and gold, catching the light like polished bronze, and its eyes, when it swooped low enough for Leo to see them, were fierce and intelligent and ancient. "Don't look directly at it," March warned, emerging from the cave behind Leo. "Predators read eye contact as a challenge, and that bird, that's an apex predator if I ever saw one." The eagle, Leo thought of it as simply the eagle, capital letter, because it seemed to deserve the distinction, circled the island several times, its cries echoing off the cliffs. Then it descended toward the lake, talons extended, and snatched a large fish from the water with casual precision. It carried its catch to a high perch on the cliff face and began to eat. "It's hunting," Aisha said, watching from the safety of the cave entrance. "This is its territory, and now we're living in it." Over the following days, the eagle became a constant presence. It would appear at dawn, circling high above the island, its shadow sweeping across the jungle like a dark hand. Sometimes it would fish in the lake. Sometimes it would perch on the highest cliffs, surveying its domain. And sometimes, this was what worried them most, it would fly low over their camp, as if studying them, deciding whether they were prey or something else. The first time it dove at them, Leo thought his heart would stop. They were near the lake, filling their water containers, when the eagle stooped. That's the word March used, stooped, like a falcon diving, coming down from a great height at terrifying speed. Its shadow covered them. Its cry was deafening. At the last possible moment, it pulled up, talons extended but not quite reaching them, and soared away. "A test," March said, his voice shaky. "It's testing us, seeing if we're dangerous, if we're easy prey, if we're worth the effort." "We need to make ourselves not worth the effort," Aisha said, her healer's mind already working on the problem. "We need to make this island uncomfortable for it when we're around." It was Leo who came up with the solution. He had noticed how the eagle's hunting relied on sight. It would circle high, spot prey, dive with incredible speed and accuracy. What if they could confuse that sight, disrupt the pattern? He began collecting the shiniest objects he could find, certain types of shells that had an almost mirror-like interior, pieces of mica that reflected light, even smooth stones that could catch the sun. Then, working with March and Aisha, he strung these objects on vines, creating a network between trees near their most commonly used paths. The objects hung at various heights, spinning slowly in the breeze, catching sunlight and throwing it in unpredictable directions. It created a kind of chaotic light show, flashes and gleams appearing and disappearing randomly. The next time the eagle swooped toward them, the effect was immediate. As it dove, it flew through the web of hanging reflections. Suddenly, it was surrounded by flashes of light from all directions, some from the actual mirrors, some from reflections of reflections. It couldn't tell which was real and which was illusion. The great bird swerved, its cry one of confusion and frustration. It pulled up sharply, nearly clipping a tree branch in its haste to get away from the confusing lights. It circled once more, much higher, then flew off toward the far side of the island. "Brilliant," March said, admiration clear in his voice. "Absolutely brilliant." From that day forward, they hung their light catchers wherever they worked or walked regularly. The eagle still hunted on the island, still perched on the high cliffs, still ruled the sky, but it left them alone, perhaps deciding that these strange, shining creatures were more trouble than they were worth. Sometimes, in the early morning when the light was soft and golden, Leo would watch the eagle soaring above the island, its wings barely moving as it rode the thermals. There was something magnificent about it, something that spoke of absolute freedom. He both feared it and admired it. This creature that answered to no one, that flew wherever it wished, that saw the whole island and the endless ocean beyond from heights Leo could only imagine. One day, he told the eagle silently, watching it circle against the pure blue sky, I'll be that free again. I'll find my way off this island and back to the sea. But I'll remember you. I'll remember that even the most powerful predators can be outsmarted if you understand how they think. The eagle cried out, perhaps in response, perhaps simply announcing its dominance to the morning. Then it wheeled away toward the cliffs, where its nest was hidden among the rocks, and Leo returned to the work of survival, a little wiser, a little more confident in his ability to solve problems through observation and ingenuity. Aisha had watched the whole interaction with Leo and the eagle, and that evening, as they sat around the fire, she said, You're becoming someone different than who you were, Leo. Not worse, not better, just evolved. Like the island is teaching you things you needed to learn. Teaching us all things, March added, how to be flexible, how to adapt, how to survive not through brute strength but through cleverness and cooperation. Leo touched the copper button at his chest as he did every night, his mother's button, his talisman of home. But now it meant something slightly different to him, not just a reminder of where he came from, but a promise of where he was going. He was being forged here, in this place without a name, shaped by challenges into someone stronger, someone more capable. I wonder what my parents would think, he said quietly, if they could see me now, living on an island, outsmarting giant birds, making fire from sticks. They would be proud, Aisha said with certainty, because you haven't given up, because you found a way to not just survive, but to grow. That's the greatest tribute you could give them, to become a person who doesn't break, even when life tries very hard to break you. The fire crackled. The jungle sang its night song around them, and high on the cliffs, silhouetted against the rising moon, the eagle settled into its nest, master of the island sky. But not, Leo thought with quiet satisfaction, master of them. Chapter 9. The Path of One Eye. They had been on the island for nearly 2 months when Leo found the second footprint. This one was fresh, the edges still sharp in the mud near the lake, and it was heading toward their old beach camp, the one they had abandoned when they first discovered signs of the giant. We should check it, Leo said, though every instinct told him to stay far away. Make sure it hasn't found our signal fire, our message in the sand. They approached the beach carefully, moving through the jungle like ghosts, using all the stealth they had learned. What they saw made them freeze in horror. The giant, the cyclops as they had come to call it, was standing in their old camp. It was even more massive than they remembered, easily 10 feet tall, with arms thick as tree trunks and hands that could crush stone. Its single eye, positioned in the center of its forehead, was the size of Leo's head, moving constantly, scanning the beach. The creature was covered in what looked like a crust of dried salt, seaweed and barnacles, as if it had crawled up from the ocean depths themselves. Its skin beneath the crust was a mottled gray-green, and when it breathed, the sound was like waves in a cave, deep and echoing and wrong. It was systematically destroying their old camp, picking up pieces of driftwood and snapping them like twigs, kicking apart their carefully arranged signal stones. Looking, Leo realized, for whoever had made these things. They retreated silently, their hearts hammering. That night they held a council in their cave. We need to move deeper, March said. Build a new camp that's harder to find. The Cyclops is actively searching now. It knows there are people on this island. But why? Aisha asked. We haven't threatened it. We've stayed far away. Territory. March replied. Or maybe just curiosity, or hunger. Does it matter? We need to stay invisible to it, or we won't survive. They spent the next several days scouting for a new location. They found it on the far side of the island, near the cliffs where the eagle nested, a place the cyclops seemed to avoid, perhaps because the terrain was too rough, perhaps because even it feared the great bird. There was a natural cave here, deeper than their first one, with multiple chambers inside. The entrance was partially hidden by a fallen tree and thick vines. Water trickled down one wall, collecting in a natural basin. It was perfect, defensible, hidden, supplied with water. They moved their camp, carrying their few possessions, transplanting their most useful plants near the new cave, setting up new fish traps in a stream that ran nearby. And they created an early warning system, lines of shells and hollow bamboo that would rattle if disturbed, set up on all approaches to the cave. Then they learned to read the silences. When the birds suddenly stopped singing, it meant the cyclops was near. When the monkeys in the trees went absolutely still, danger was close. When even the insects seemed to hold their breath, that was the time to hide, to become part of the cave's shadows, to wait with barely controlled terror as heavy footfalls shook the ground nearby. Leo became expert at this waiting. He learned to breathe so slowly, so shallowly that he seemed to become part of the stone itself. He learned to quiet his mind, to push away panic, to exist in a state of alert calm. It was a kind of meditation born of necessity, and it changed him in ways he wouldn't fully understand until later. One evening, they were at the edge of their territory, gathering a particular fruit that Aisha had discovered was both nutritious and delicious, when they heard it. The sound of splintering wood, a deep rumbling roar, and then footsteps, heavy, getting closer. They froze. The cyclops emerged from the jungle barely 50 yards away, so close Leo could see the barnacles encrusted on its shoulders, could smell the rank ocean and rot scent of it. The single eye swiveled, scanning the area. They were partially hidden behind a large boulder, but if the cyclops walked just a few more steps in their direction, Leo's hand found March's arm, found Aisha's hand. They held onto each other, barely breathing, barely existing. The copper button pressed against Leo's chest, a small point of warmth, a reminder that he had survived worse than this, that he could survive anything if he refused to give up. The cyclops stood there for an eternity, its eye moving back and forth. Then, with another rumbling sound that might have been frustration or hunger or simple mindless vocalization, it turned and lumbered back into the jungle, heading toward the coastal caves where it seemed to spend most of its time. They waited a full hour before moving, making sure it was truly gone. Then they practically ran back to their cave, not speaking until they were safe inside, the hidden entrance secure behind them. Too close, March said, his voice shaking slightly. That was too close. But they had survived. Again. And each time they survived, Leo felt himself growing more confident, more capable. The island was teaching him patience, teaching him observation, teaching him that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to hide, when to wait, when to let danger pass rather than confronting it. He thought of Fletcher on the north wind, teaching him to read the sea. He thought of Captain Morrison, teaching him about skill and luck. He was learning similar lessons here, but the teachers were an island, a giant, an eagle, and the constant pressure of survival. And he was learning, growing, becoming someone he had never imagined he could be, someone who could face monsters and make fire, and read the silence for warnings of danger, someone who didn't need a ship's crew to survive, who had found strength in himself he hadn't known existed. That night, as he lay in the safety of the cave, Listening to March's gentle snoring and Aisha's quiet breathing, Leo whispered a promise to himself. I will remember all of this. When I get home, when, not if, I will remember that I survived an island, outsmarted a cyclops, and refused to give up no matter how impossible it seemed, and I will never forget how strong that made me. The cave was dark and safe. The ocean murmured in the distance, and Leo drifted into sleep with the copper button clutched in his hand, a bridge between who he had been and who he was becoming. Chapter 10. Friends from the Forest. Fear diminishes where friendship lives. Leo discovered this truth gradually as the weeks stretched into months on the island. It began with Spark, a small lemur with enormous amber eyes and fur that seemed to catch fire in the sunlight. The creature had been watching them for days, Leo realized, always at the edge of vision, never quite approaching. But it was curious, drawn by the smell of their cooking fire, by the sound of human voices. Leo started leaving small offerings, pieces of fruit, nuts, once a small fish from their traps. The lemur would wait until they moved away, then dart in, grab the food, and vanish back into the trees. But each day, it came a little closer, stayed a little longer. Finally, one morning, Leo sat very still near the cave entrance with a piece of mango in his outstretched hand. He waited. The lemur approached cautiously, its movements quick and jittery, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of danger. It reached out with one small hand, touched the mango, pulled back, reached out again. Then, in a moment of trust that felt like a gift, it took the fruit from Leo's hand and sat back on its haunches to eat, its eyes never leaving Leo's face. From that day, Spark became their companion. The lemur would ride on Leo's shoulders as he explored, its small hands tangled in his hair. It would steal dried berries from their stores, always with a guilty look that was almost comically human. And at night it would curl up near the fire, a small ball of warm fur, as much a part of their family as any of them. March, meanwhile, had made an unusual friend of his own, a hermit crab the size of a cat, living in a beautifully spiraled shell. The crab had begun appearing near their evening fires, drawn by warmth or food scraps, or perhaps simply by companionship. March named it Sentinel, because it would position itself at the cave entrance each evening, its eye stalk swiveling constantly, as if standing guard. Every ship needs a watchman, March said with a smile, feeding Sentinel a piece of fish. Even if that ship is a cave on an island without a name. Aisha discovered an injured sea turtle on the beach one morning, its shell cracked, probably from being battered against rocks during a storm. She carefully cleaned the wound, mixed a paste from resin and herbs, and applied it to the crack, working with the gentle precision that marked everything she did. The turtle recovered slowly under her care. Aisha would carry it to shallow water each day, letting it swim gently, building its strength. As it healed, the turtle seemed to recognize her, would extend its head when she approached, would tolerate her touch with a patience that suggested understanding. All healers need patience, Aisha said one evening, watching the turtle paddle in the shallows. Even here, even now, I am what I was meant to be. The place changes, but the purpose remains. These animals became more than just companions. They became signs of hope, proof that even in exile connection was possible. They reminded the three humans that life was more than just survival, that there was room for gentleness even in harsh circumstances, that caring for something beyond yourself gave meaning to existence. And then there was the boat. It washed ashore after a storm, battered and empty but fundamentally sound. Just a small rowboat, perhaps lost from a ship, perhaps cut loose deliberately, perhaps adrift for years. But to Leo, March, and Aisha, It was a gift from the gods. They dragged it above the tide line and examined it carefully. The wood was good, weathered but solid. It was large enough for 3 people with room for supplies, but it had no oars. Several boards were cracked, and it leaked in multiple places. "We can fix this," March said, his fisherman's hands already assessing what needed to be done. "It will take time, but we can make this seaworthy." They spent weeks on the project. March used techniques passed down through generations of boat builders, teaching Leo as he worked. They cut grooves in the cracked boards, wedged in slivers of harder wood, and bound everything with vine wrapping that would swell when wet, creating a seal. They collected tree resin and melted it over their fire, painting it into every seam and crack. For oars, they shaped long pieces of bamboo, splitting the ends and wedging in flat pieces of wood to create crude but functional blades. They weren't elegant, but they would work. Aisha contributed in her own way. She braided rope from palm fiber, stronger than any vine, creating lines they could use to tie down supplies and possibly even rig a simple sail if they found one. As they worked, something shifted between them. This was no longer just about survival on the island. This was about departure, about hope, about the future beyond their exile. "Friends are tools too," Aisha said one evening as they sat admiring their work. "But not the kind you use carelessly. Friends are tools you treasure, care for, protect. And in return, they make you stronger than you ever could be alone." Leo thought about his friends on the North Wind, Fletcher, Tom, Captain Morrison. He wondered if they thought he was dead. He wondered if they ever spoke of him, if they remembered the cabin boy who had climbed the rigging in a storm. He promised himself that when, not if, when, he made it back to civilization, he would find them, thank them for the lessons they had taught him. But for now, his friends were here. March, with his patient wisdom and steady hands. Aisha, with her healing touch and unshakable calm. Spark, with his playful energy and trust sentinel, standing guard at the cave entrance. And the turtle, now strong enough to return to the sea, but still coming back to the beach each evening as if to check on them. They were a family, this strange collection of survivors, not bound by blood, but by something stronger, shared struggle, mutual respect, and the kind of loyalty that comes from knowing others have seen you at your weakest and stood by you anyway. The boat was nearly ready. Their supplies were being gathered: dried fish, coconuts, containers of fresh water, fire-starting materials carefully wrapped to stay dry. They were planning for a journey across unknown waters to unknown destinations, but they were planning together, and that made all the difference. One night, as Leo worked on the final repairs to the boat, Spark on his shoulder and Sentinel watching from nearby, he felt a profound gratitude wash over him. Yes, he had been taken by pirates. Yes, he had been shipwrecked. Yes, he had faced dangers he never imagined. But he had also found something precious, the knowledge that humans could adapt to anything, survive anything, build community anywhere. "Thank you," he whispered to the island, to his friends, human and animal, to whatever fate had brought him here. "Thank you for teaching me what I'm capable of." The waves whispered against the shore. The stars wheeled overhead. And on an island without a name, preparations continued for a journey that would either lead to freedom or to one final adventure. Chapter 11. 5 years. Marked by shells. Time is strange when you live by nature's rhythms rather than human calendars. Days flow into weeks, weeks into months, months into seasons, marked not by dates, but by changes in wetcher, in fruiting cycles, in the migration of birds. Leo began marking time on a rock face near their cave. Each day he would make a small notch with a sharp stone, just a simple line, but a way to hold on to the passage of time, to remind himself that each day mattered, that each day brought him closer to what? Rescue? Escape? Simply the end of his story, whatever that might be. Every 100th notch he would mark it differently, deeper, longer, and beside it he would place a shell from the beach. Each shell was different, chosen with care, a small work of art to commemorate a milestone, a spiral shell for the first 100 days, a mother-of-pearl shell for the second, a perfectly formed scallop shell for the third. The shells accumulated. 100 days became 200, became 500, became 1,000. Seasons cycled. The monsoons came and went, bringing torrential rains that filled their water stores and made the jungle explode with new growth. Then dry seasons, when the heat was oppressive and water had to be carefully conserved. Leo changed with the passing time. His body hardened with labor and a lean diet of fish, fruit, and coconuts. His hands became permanently calloused. His skin darkened to a deep tan. His hair, which had been short when he first boarded the north wind, grew long and was tied back with vine. He learned every corner of the island, could navigate it in darkness by memory and feel alone. He learned to read the sky with the same facility Fletcher had once demonstrated. The patterns of clouds that meant a storm was 3 days away, the particular quality of sunset light that promised good weather, the behavior of birds that indicated changes in wind direction. The island became a teacher more patient and more thorough than any human could be. He built a smoking shed for fish, learning through trial and error the right combination of wood and time to preserve their catch for weeks. He constructed a better system for collecting rainwater, using hollowed logs to channel water from the cave roof into their storage shells. He even managed to create a primitive forge, using the hottest fire he could build, and stones from the beach, where he could heat and shape metal objects they occasionally found washed ashore. March taught him advanced navigation, scratching diagrams in the sand, showing him how sailors had found their way across vast oceans, using only stars and dead reckoning. "If we ever get off this island," March would say, "always when, never if, maintaining hope against hope, you'll need to know how to guide us home." Aisha taught him about healing, about the properties of the hundreds of plants that grew on the island, which roots reduced inflammation, which leaves eased pain, which bark could be chewed to settle the stomach. "A sailor who knows medicine," she said, "is worth his weight in gold. You're learning skills that will serve you for life, wherever that life takes you." The cyclops, one eye as they now called it, became a regular but manageable danger. They learned its patterns, its preferred paths, its feeding times. They knew when to hide and when it was safe to move about. Once they even watched from a high vantage point, as one eye caught a large shark in shallow water, grappling with it in a battle that seemed impossible, but ended with the giant carrying its catch back to its cave. They were grateful it preferred fish to humans. The eagle remained a presence in the sky, but after the incident with the light catchers, it bothered them less. They would see it hunting, see it soaring on thermals, hear its cries echoing off the cliffs. It was simply part of the island now, like the palm trees and the waves. As the third year turned into the fourth, and the fourth into the fifth, Leo sometimes wondered if they would ever leave. Was this his life now? Would he grow old on this island, eventually being laid to rest in some quiet corner of the jungle? There were worse fates, he supposed. He had food, water, shelter, and most importantly, friends. But the hope never died completely. Every morning, Leo would climb to the highest point they could safely reach and scan the horizon for sails. Every storm he wondered if it might bring a ship close enough to see their signal fire. Every piece of human-made debris that washed ashore, a bottle, a piece of rope, a plank with nails, reminded him that somewhere beyond the horizon, the human world still existed. The boat they had repaired and improved sat ready, covered with palm fronds to protect it from sun and rain. It was their lifeboat, their escape pod, their symbol of hope. They had even fashioned a crude sail from woven palm fronds, not beautiful, but potentially functional. "When the time comes," March would say, running his hands over the boat's hull, checking for any new cracks or damage, "we'll be ready." On the day that marked 5 full years on the island, 1,825 notches on the rock, 18 shells arranged below them, they held a small ceremony. It seemed important to mark the occasion, to acknowledge the enormity of what they had survived. They built a special fire on the beach, larger than their usual evening fire. They cooked a feast by their standards: grilled fish seasoned with herbs, roasted coconut, a fruit that Aisha had discovered could be fermented into a mildly alcoholic drink. They told stories of their lives before, memories that had grown soft around the edges but were still precious. March spoke of his grandchildren, hoping they still remembered him. Aisha spoke of the sick she had healed, hoping her knowledge hadn't been lost. Leo spoke of the north wind, of Fletcher and the captain, of his parents and the house on the hill. "I haven't given up," Leo said, holding the copper button that he still wore, now darkened with age but still present. "Every day I keep this with me and I remember my promise I will return. Somehow. Someday. We will return," Aisha corrected gently. "Together, as we've done everything else." "Together," March agreed. They raised their coconut shell cups in a toast to survival, to friendship, to hope that refused to die no matter how many years passed. That night, Leo looked at his collection of shells marking the hundreds of days, at the intricate patterns they made, at the physical manifestation of time passing. 5 years, 1,825 days. And yet, he did not feel like those days had been wasted. He had learned more in these 5 years than in all his previous life. He had discovered strengths he never knew he possessed. He had become someone different, someone stronger, someone capable of facing anything. "I'm close," he whispered to the copper button, to his mother's memory, to whatever future awaited him. "I can feel it. Our rescue is close." And though he had no logical reason to believe it, he felt the truth of those words in his bones. Chapter 12. The Wind of Change. It came after a storm, not during but after, when the sea had calmed and the air felt washed clean. Leo was walking the beach at dawn, as he did every morning, checking for anything useful the storm might have brought ashore. And there it was. A sail, not intact, but a large piece of sail canvas, torn and battered but still strong. The kind of heavy, tight-woven material that was meant to catch wind and drive ships across oceans. Real canvas, not their woven palm fronds. Professional sailing material. Leo stood staring at it for a long moment, his heart beginning to hammer. Then he ran, actually ran, something he rarely did to conserve energy, back to the cave. "March! Aisha! Come look!" They came quickly, alarm giving way to excitement when they saw what he had found. The 3 of them stood around the canvas, touching it reverently, as if it were sacred. "This is a sign," Aisha said quietly. "After 5 years, this is a sign." "More than a sign," March said, his fisherman's hands already assessing the canvas. "This is a gift. This is a real sail. With this, our boat becomes truly seaworthy. With this, we can cover real distance, not just drift and hope." They spent the day working on it. First, they spread it out and examined it carefully, finding the damaged sections and trimming them away. What remained was still large enough to serve as a sail for their small boat. They reinforced the edges with rope Aisha had braided, attached it to the mast they had fashioned from a straight bamboo pole, and rigged it with lines that would allow them to raise, lower, and angle the sail. When they were done, they stood back and looked at their boat. Truly a boat now, not just a patched hull with oars. It had a sail. It had supplies lashed down securely. It had everything they would need for a voyage. "We need to wait for the right wind," March said, studying the sky. "Not just any wind, a favorable wind, steady, that will carry us toward shipping lanes." For the next several days, they watched the weather obsessively. March taught Leo to read the subtle signs, the movement of high clouds, the behavior of seabirds, the feel of the air on his skin. They were waiting for a specific pattern, winds from the east, steady and strong, that would carry them westward toward where March believed the major trade routes must be. They gathered supplies, dried fish wrapped in leaves, coconuts, both for food and the water inside, Aisha's medicinal herbs carefully bundled, fresh water in every container they possessed, fire-starting materials sealed in layers of waterproof leaves and resin, everything they might need for a journey of uncertain length to an uncertain destination. They said goodbye to their animal friends. Spark seemed to sense something was happening, becoming unusually clingy, riding on Leo's shoulders constantly. Sentinel positioned himself at the cave entrance as always, eye stalks tracking their movements. The turtle came to the beach that evening, as it often did, and Aisha spent a long time sitting beside it, her hand on its shell. "Thank you," she whispered to it. "Thank you for letting me heal you, for reminding me of my purpose." On the 5th morning after finding the sail, March woke them before dawn. "Today," he said simply, "the wind is right, the sky is clear. If we're going to do this, today is the day." They moved quickly, efficiently, the product of 5 years of working together. They carried the boat to the water's edge. They loaded the supplies, distributing weight carefully for balance. They extinguished their fire, their constant companion for 5 years, and scattered the ashes. They took one last look at the cave that had been their home, the island that had been their prison, and their teacher Leo climbed to the highest point one final time. He looked at the rock where he had marked 5 years of days, at the shells that represented 1,825 sunrises. He touched each shell once, a final goodbye, then rejoined the others at the beach. The eagle appeared as they were about to launch, circling overhead, its cry echoing off the cliffs. Leo looked up at it, this magnificent predator that had tested them and finally accepted them. "Goodbye," he called up to it. "Thank you for teaching me to think, to adapt, to survive." The eagle circled once more, then wheeled away toward its cliff nest, as if giving them permission to leave. They pushed the boat into the gentle waves. It floated perfectly, riding high and stable. They climbed in, March at the tiller, Leo and Aisha ready to adjust the sail, and as the morning sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in gold and rose, March gave the order. "Raise the sail." Leo and Aisha pulled on the lines. The canvas rose, catching the steady east wind, snapping taut with a sound like thunder, and the boat began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, pushing through the gentle waves, heading away from the island. Leo looked back and saw it shrinking behind them, the beach where they had first washed ashore, the jungle where they had learned to survive, the cliffs where the eagle nested, the dark cave entrance that had sheltered them through storms and fears. 5 years, he whispered. 5 years of my life on that island. "But look what you became," Aisha said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Look at the person those 5 years created. Would you trade that? Leo thought about it honestly. The terror, yes. He would gladly have avoided that. The desperation, the close calls with one eye, the countless uncomfortable nights. But the lessons, the strength, the knowledge that he could face anything and survive, the friendship with March and Aisha? No, he said finally, I wouldn't trade it. It made me who I am. They sailed on. The island grew smaller, becoming a dark shape on the horizon, then a smudge, then nothing at all. And Leo felt simultaneously free and terrified. They were on the open ocean now in a small boat with limited supplies, heading toward a destination they could only hope to find. But they were moving. They were trying. They were refusing to give up. March adjusted the tiller, setting their course by the sun. Aisha checked their water supplies, rationing in her mind. Leo watched the horizon ahead, looking for any sign of ships, of land, of hope. The copper button at his chest caught the sunlight, flashing like a signal. His mother's button, his talisman, still with him after everything, the pirate capture, the shipwreck, 5 years on an island, and now this voyage into the unknown. We're close, he said again, believing it more strongly than ever. I can feel it. We're so close to home. The wind held steady, the sail pulled them westward, and somewhere ahead, beyond the endless blue horizon, the world waited. Chapter 13. Horizons and Hope. The first day at sea was harder than Leo had expected. The island, for all its dangers, had been solid ground. Now everything was motion, the constant rise and fall of waves, the rocking of the boat, the endless dizzying expanse of water in every direction. The horizon remained always the same distance away, a teasing circle that moved with them no matter how far they traveled. March held the tiller with experienced hands, making constant small adjustments, reading the waves and wind with instincts built over a lifetime. Aisha and Leo took turns watching the horizon, managing the sail, and trying not to think about how small they were in this vast emptiness. Tell me we're going the right direction, Leo said on the second day, when the island had long since vanished behind them, and there was nothing but ocean in all directions. West, March said with confidence. The major trade routes run east-west along these latitudes. If we keep sailing west, eventually we'll either find land or cross a shipping lane. That's not hope, lad. That's navigation. They fell into a rhythm. March would navigate by day using the sun's position. By night using stars, he taught Leo to recognize Polaris, the North Star, the Southern Cross, Orion with his distinctive belt, ancient friends of sailors, constant and reliable. Water and food were carefully rationed, a few sips of water at dawn, at midday, at dusk, a piece of dried fish, a portion of coconut meat. Their supplies would last perhaps 2 weeks if they were careful. After that, Leo didn't let himself think about after that. On the third day, they saw their first sign of life, dolphins. A pod of them, appearing suddenly from the deep, racing alongside the boat, leaping and spinning as if for pure joy. Leo laughed for the first time since leaving the island, delighted by their playfulness. Good luck, March said, smiling. Dolphins are good luck for sailors. They're saying we're on the right path. That night, the stars were so bright and numerous that the ocean itself seemed to reflect them, creating the illusion that they were sailing through space rather than water. Leo lay in the bottom of the boat during his rest period, looking up at the infinite display, feeling simultaneously insignificant and connected to something vast and ancient. My father taught me the stars, he said quietly to Aisha, who was on watch beside him. Before he died, he said they were the one thing that never changed, never betrayed you. No matter where you were in the world, if you could see the stars, you could find your way home. Wise man, Aisha said. And he was right. We're using his gift right now. Those lessons he gave you. He's still guiding you even now. On the 5th day, the wind shifted. March frowned at the sky, noting the high, thin clouds that were spreading from the south. Weather's changing, he said. Might be rough ahead. The storm hit that evening. Not as violent as the one that had freed them from the pirates, but strong enough rain lashed them horizontally. Waves grew from manageable swells to frightening walls of water. They lowered the sail and held on, riding it out, bailing water constantly with their cupped hands and shells. Leo found himself strangely calm. He had been through worse. The island had taught him patience, had taught him that storms pass if you can just survive them. So he held the rope, bailed water, and waited. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving them wet and exhausted, but alive. Their boat had held. March's careful repairs had done their job. Most of their supplies were still secure, and the new wind, when it came, was steady and strong from the northeast, pushing them south and west. "See," March said, wringing out his shirt. "The storm brought us a gift, a faster wind, a better angle. Sometimes the hardest moments push us exactly where we need to go." On the 7th day, they saw birds, not just the occasional seabird, but flocks of them, heading in a consistent direction. Land birds, which meant land was somewhere within their range. "We're close," March said, his eyes tracking the birds. "Very close." That night, Leo couldn't sleep. He kept watch even during his rest period, scanning the darkness for any sign, a light, a shape, anything that might mean they had found safety. And then, just before dawn, he saw it. A tiny point of light on the horizon. So small he thought at first he was imagining it. But it stayed there, constant and real. "March! Aisha! There!" They all looked. The light was unmistakable now, a ship's lantern, distant but visible. "It's moving," March said, tracking it. "On a course that will pass south of us. We need to signal." Leo grabbed their polished shell, the one he had kept for exactly this purpose. As the sun rose behind them, he angled the shell to catch the light, creating flashes that shot across the water like lightning. Flash, flash, flash. The ancient signal of distress, of sailors needing help. For agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The distant ship continued on its course. Leo's arm ached from holding the shell, but he didn't stop. Flash, flash, flash. Then, movement on the distant ship, a change in its sails. It was turning toward them. "They saw us," Aisha whispered, hardly daring to believe. "They're coming." The ship grew slowly larger, resolving from a distant shape into something real, a merchant vessel. Flying flags Leo recognized from his time on the North Wind as it approached. They could see figures on deck, crew members pointing and calling out. A boat was lowered, rowed by 4 strong sailors. It pulled alongside them, and a weather-beaten face looked down at them with amazement. "3 of you, in a boat this size, this far from land?" the sailor said in accented English. "How long have you been at sea?" 7 days, March answered. "But before that, 5 years on an island. 5 years. The sailor's eyes widened. "Get them aboard," he called up to the ship. "Get them aboard now. Captain will want to hear this story." Chapter 14. Home and Forgiveness. The merchant ship was called the Frigantine, and its captain was a Portuguese man named Silva, who treated them with a kindness that brought tears to Aisha's eyes. They were given fresh water, all they could drink, and hot food that tasted like heaven after years of fish and coconut. They were given clean clothes and hammocks in the crew quarters and permission to rest for as long as they needed. But first, they had to tell their story. Captain Silva listened intently as they recounted it all. The pirate attack, the storm, the 5 years on the island, their escape. Other crew members gathered around, silent and attentive, as the tale unfolded. When they finished, there was a long moment of silence. "You survived 5 years," Silva said finally, shaking his head in wonder. "Most people wouldn't have lasted 5 months. You are either incredibly lucky or incredibly strong. Perhaps both." "We had each other," Aisha said simply. That made all the difference. The Frigantine was bound for a port city that Leo recognized by name. He had heard Fletcher speak of it. It was a major trading hub, a place where ships from all nations came to buy and sell. From there, they could find passage anywhere in the world. During the voyage, Leo was drawn to the ship's rigging, to the familiar rhythms of sailing. He found himself climbing the ratlines without thinking, helping to adjust sails, falling back into the patterns Fletcher had taught him years ago. His body remembered, even when his mind had been focused on island survival. One of the Frigantine's sailors, an older man named Costa, watched him work and finally approached. "You know your way around a ship," Costa observed. "Where did you learn?" "A schooner called the North Wind," Leo said, "before the pirates took me. It feels like a lifetime ago." "The North Wind," Costa repeated thoughtfully. "I know that ship. Good vessel, good crew. Last I heard she was trading along the northern routes. If you want to find her, the harbor master in port will have records. Ships like that, they're known." Hope flared in Leo's chest. The North Wind might still be sailing Fletcher, Captain Morris and Tom. They might still be out there, still working the same trade routes. He might actually be able to find them, to thank them, to show them what had become of the cabin boy they had taken on so many years ago. The Frigantine made port on a morning that sparkled with promise. The city spread along the harbor, buildings climbing the hillside, church bells ringing. The air filled with the sounds and smells of commerce and life. To Leo, who had spent 5 years with only March and Aisha for human company, it was overwhelming. Captain Silva gave them money, not much but enough to get started, and offered to put in a good word with other captains he knew. "You've been tested by the sea and passed," he said. "Any captain would be fortunate to have you." They stood on the dock together, March, Aisha, and Leo, 3 people who had been strangers and became family. The moment of parting was approaching, and none of them quite knew how to face it. "I need to find my family," March said quietly. "My village is 3 days north by coastal ship. My children, my grandchildren. I need to know if they remember me." "I'm going to the city hospital," Aisha said. "I'm going to offer my services as a healer. I've learned so much from the island, plants and treatments they won't know here. I can help people again. That's what I was meant to do." They both looked at Leo, waiting. "I need to go home," he said, "to my town, to my house, to see what's left. And then—" he touched the copper button at his chest. "I need to find the North Wind. If she's still sailing, I need to find Fletcher and the captain. I need them to know I survived, that I remembered everything they taught me." They embraced, long and tight, the kind of embrace that acknowledges shared suffering and shared triumph. Then, with promises to write if they could, to somehow stay in touch despite the vastness of the world, they parted ways. Leo found a ship heading to his home port, a small coastal trader that would make the journey in 3 days. He worked his passage, helping with sails and rigging, earning surprised respect from the crew. When they asked about his skills, he simply said, "I've had good teachers." The town appeared on the horizon just as he remembered it, the harbor, the hill with houses climbing it, the distant mountains beyond. But 5 years had changed it too. New buildings, new docks, a bustle and energy that seemed different somehow. He disembarked with shaking hands and walked through streets that were familiar yet strange. Some businesses he remembered were gone, replaced by others. Children played in the square, children who had been toddlers when he left, now young enough to have their own adventures. He climbed the hill to his house, his heart pounding with each step. Would it still be there? Would someone else be living in it? What would he find? The house stood where it always had, though it looked different. The garden was overgrown, the shutters needed paint, but in the window, impossibly, wonderfully, a light burned. Leo approached slowly and knocked on the door he had left through so many years ago. It opened, and an elderly woman looked out at him, curiosity turning to confusion. "Can I help you, young man?" This is my house," Leo said, his voice cracking. Or it was, "My parents, they died, and I left, and I've been gone for years, and I just wanted to see." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by compassion. "You're Leo, the boy who left the note. I will return stronger." "You found my note?" "I'm your mother's sister, your Aunt Helena. When you disappeared, when no one knew what happened to you, I moved in to care for the house, to keep it ready in case you came back. Everyone said you were dead, but I couldn't believe it. I kept the light burning in the window every night, so if you ever did come home, you'd see it and know someone was waiting." Leo felt tears streaming down his face. Family. He had family, and she had waited, had believed. "Come in," she said gently. "Come home." The house was as he remembered, but cared for, lived in, loved. His father's tools were still on the workbench, oiled and maintained. His mother's chair still sat by the window, and on the mantel, in a place of honor, was the note he had left. "I will return stronger." "Are you?" Helena asked softly. "Stronger?" Leo thought about everything. The north wind, the pirates, the island, March and Aisha, One Eye and the Eagle, 5 years of survival and growth and learning who he was at his core. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." That night, sleeping in his childhood bed for the first time in 7 years, Leo held the copper button and whispered to his parents, "I made it. I'm home, and I'm going to make you proud." But home, he was discovering, was not quite the same as it had been. He had changed too much. The boy who had left was gone, replaced by a man who had faced the ocean and islands and monsters and emerged transformed. After a week of rest and reunion with his aunt, of hearing about the town's changes and sharing carefully edited versions of his adventures, Leo knew what he needed to do next. He needed to return to the sea. Chapter 15. Captain of Hope. Leo went to the harbor every day asking after the north wind. Most harbormaster offices had records, ship names, captains, last known ports. It took 2 weeks of searching, of following rumors and old manifests, but finally he found it. The north wind had been in port just 3 months earlier, was scheduled to return in approximately 6 weeks. During those weeks of waiting, Leo worked on any ship that would have him. His skills were undeniable now. He could splice rope with the efficiency of a 20-year veteran, could navigate by stars with confidence, could read weather signs that most sailors missed. Captains began to notice him, to remember his name. One captain in particular, a grizzled veteran named Harrison, took an interest. "You sail like someone who's been tested," Harrison observed. "Like someone who's seen things most sailors only hear about in taverns." Leo told him some of it, enough to explain the confidence, the capability, the way he moved on a ship as if it were an extension of his own body. "If you ever want a permanent berth," Harrison said, I'd take you as first mate in a heartbeat. Hell, give it a few years. You could captain your own vessel." The idea took root, Captain. The word had a weight to it, a resonance. Once he had been a cabin boy running away from grief, then a survivor learning to endure. Now he could be someone who led, who took responsibility, who helped others find their way through storms. When the north wind finally sailed into harbor on a bright morning, Leo was waiting on the dock. His heart hammered as the familiar ship drew near, smaller than he remembered, more weathered, but unmistakably her. And there, directing the docking, was Fletcher. The first mate had aged, more gray in his hair, deeper lines in his face, but he moved with the same competence Leo remembered. When Fletcher's eyes swept the dock and landed on Leo, he froze, simply stopped moving, staring as if seeing a ghost. Leo raised his hand in greeting, smiling through sudden tears. Fletcher practically ran down the gangplank. "Leo, is that you? Everyone thought you were dead. The pirates took you and we never heard." They embraced, and Fletcher's solid presence brought back a flood of memories. Lessons on the deck, storms weathered together, the feeling of being part of a crew. "I survived," Leo said simply. "I have so much to tell you." Captain Morrison appeared on deck, saw the reunion, and his weathered face broke into a rare smile. Tom and several other crew members Leo remembered gathered around. They took him to a tavern, and Leo told his story, not all of it. Some things were too personal, too painful, but enough. The pirate capture, the shipwreck, surviving on an island, the voyage back 5 years, Fletcher kept repeating, shaking his head. 5 years alone on an island, and you survived. "Not alone," Leo corrected. "I had friends. That's what made survival possible, not being alone." Over the following months, Leo sailed with the north wind again. It was like coming home, but different. He was different. The cabin boy was gone, replaced by someone who could stand watch alone through the darkest night, who could make decisions under pressure, who could teach newer sailors the same lessons Fletcher had once taught him. "You've become what I hoped you would," Fletcher told him one night as they stood at the rail together. "Someone who knows not just how to sail, but why, someone who understands that seamanship is more than technique, it's character." 2 years passed. Leo learned everything he could, not just about sailing, but about command, about leadership, about how to earn respect rather than demand it. He learned how to manage supplies, how to negotiate with merchants, how to make hard decisions that affected other people's lives. And slowly he saved his money. Every voyage, every job well done, he put aside what he could. He had a goal now, clear and unwavering. On the morning of his 26th birthday, nearly 10 years after he had first left his house on the hill, Leo used his savings to purchase a small ship, not large, not fancy, but sound and seaworthy. A vessel with good bones and solid rigging, waiting for someone to believe in it. He stood on the dock, looking at his ship, feeling a mixture of pride and terror and absolute certainty. This was right. This was what he was meant to do. He hired a crew carefully, not the biggest or strongest sailors, but those who showed character, determination, willingness to learn. Among them were 2 young people who reminded him of himself at 17, eager, uncertain, running from something or towards something, needing a chance. "I'll give you the same chance someone once gave me," he told them. "Work hard, be willing to learn, never give up. Do that, and you'll always have a place on this ship." On the bow, in a place of honor, Leo fixed the copper button his mother had given him. He had it mounted in a small brass frame, polished until it caught the light like a star. A talisman, a reminder, a guide. The ship needed a name. Leo had thought long about this. about what word could capture everything he had learned, everything he had survived, everything he believed. He painted it himself on the stern, in letters that would weather any storm. Hope. The morning of their first voyage, the crew assembled on deck. Leo stood before them, feeling the weight of command, the responsibility of other lives in his hands. He thought of Captain Morrison, of Fletcher, of March's steady wisdom and Aisha's quiet strength. He thought of 5 years on an island learning to survive. He thought of his parents and the promise he had made. "Before we cast off," he said to his crew, "I want to tell you something. This ship is called Hope because that's the most important thing any sailor can carry. Not rope, not canvas, not even fresh water. Hope, the belief that no matter how dark the storm, we'll find our way through if we don't give up. Every person on this ship matters. From captain to cabin boy, we're all essential parts of one machine. We look out for each other. We learn from each other. We forgive mistakes and celebrate victories together. And one more thing." He touched the copper button on the bow. "Never give up. Learn to make friends even in the darkest places. And believe in luck, not blind luck, but the luck that comes to those who work hard and keep trying even when it seems impossible. If you remember those things, if you live by them, you'll become sailors in the truest sense. Not just people who work on ships, but people who understand that the sea teaches us how to live, with courage, with humility, with respect for forces greater than ourselves." The crew was silent, taking in his words. Then, one by one, they nodded. They understood, or they would, in time. "Cast off," Leo ordered, his voice steady and sure. The lines were released. The sails were raised, catching the morning wind with that glorious snapping sound Leo had first heard 10 years ago. And the ship Hope, with its young captain, its hopeful crew, and its copper button shining in the sun like a promise kept, slipped away from the dock and headed for open water. Leo stood at the wheel, feeling the ship respond to his touch, feeling the wind and waves become extensions of his will. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The horizon opened before them, endless and full of possibility. Somewhere beyond it were new ports, new adventures, new challenges. But Leo was ready. The sea had tested him and found him worthy. The island had taught him and let him go. And now he was teaching others, passing on the lessons, creating the next generation of sailors who would know that giving up was never an option. As the land fell away behind them and the open ocean embraced them, Leo smiled. He had kept his promise. He had returned stronger. And now he was giving back, offering others the same chance he had been given to discover who they could become when they refused to surrender to despair. The copper button caught the sunlight and flashed like a lighthouse, guiding them forward. And Captain Leo, survivor of pirates and islands and 5 years of exile, sailed his ship Hope toward the place where sea meets sky, where endings become beginnings, and where dreams transform into reality for those brave enough to chase them. The gulls cried overhead, the waves sang their eternal song, and somewhere in the vastness of the ocean, dolphins leaped and played, celebrating another sailor who had learned the sea's greatest lesson: never give up, never stop believing, and always, always keep hope alive. The end. Sleep well, dear listener. May your dreams be peaceful and your heart be light. Like Leo, may you face tomorrow with courage, knowing that every storm passes, every challenge makes you stronger, and every journey, no matter how difficult, leads you closer to becoming who you were always meant to be. Rest now. The story is complete, and you are safe.